Today we're going to be learning Ketubot Daf Hey. It's great seeing many of you at the Siyum last night. Hope you're riding high on your finishing Masechet Yevamot. For those who are new, you'll get to that in a few months. We're going to get started with Ketubot Daf Hey. Today's daf is sponsored by Hannah Petrokovsky in honor of Amy Cohn and Karen Kirschbaum for their gracious hosting and teaching at the Jerusalem Yevamot Siyum. We're going to start from the bottom of Dalet Amud Bet. We're going to start with this line. If you recall, we quoted a Braita, and in the Braita, we were discussing other dates. Besides that there's dates one should get married, there are certain dates one shouldn't get married. So Amar, ben kach lo yiv'ol, not dates, but days of the week. Lo yiv'ol, lo be'erev Shabbat, lo be'motzei Shabbat. For sure, no matter what, okay, whatever day you end up, remember we had that in case of ones, in case of sakana, danger, there were days that one could get married, but not on Friday. Okay, we're going to see Friday or let's say Shabbat. Now, they're really talking here about lo yiv'ol. One cannot have relations for the first time, not on Friday night and not on Motzei Shabbat, Saturday night, which means basically, and we'll see this, you'll see right away that it's clear they mean this, that therefore you can't get married on Friday or you can't get married on Saturday night. So now they're going to say, Bishlama be'erev Shabbat. That's pretty clear. Mishum chabura. Because what happens is you can't intentionally cause yourself to bleed on Shabbat. That's called making a chabura, which is a tolada, an outgrowth of the malacha of shochet, slaughtering an animal. So you're not allowed to make one bleed. So when they have relations, the man causes the woman to bleed when he tears her hymen. They're having relations for the first time. And therefore, that's why it's obvious that will be forbidden. Now, I say this with a grain of salt because in a little while, and this is a bit of a strange thing about our sugya, later on in today's daf, the Gemara is going to question, is this making a chabur or not? And it's the Amoraim speaking, who are from the generations after the time that the Braitot were written. This is a Braita, which is from the Mishnah time period. Generally, if there's a Braita saying it, it's pretty clear and there's no question. But obviously, what happened, or not obviously, but what the commentaries claim is that later they're going to question this, whether it's really doing a chabura or not, and whether it's really forbidden on Shabbat or not, for all sorts of possible reasons. We'll see. That's going to have to be the way we end the daf. And the commentaries claim it must be that they didn't see this first Braita. They didn't have it in front of them. Right? We have it all. We have the luxury of having this book that's organized. It brings us everything. They didn't obviously know about this Braita, otherwise they wouldn't have asked the question. If you don't understand it that way, it's very confusing to understand what's going on. So in any case, right now we're assuming not Friday, not Saturday night. Why? Well, Friday is obvious because then you'll end up with having relations on Friday night, in which case it will be this chabura. He will injure her, cause her to bleed, and that's forbidden to do on Shabbat. And there, again, there's this assumption that if you're getting married that day, you're having relations already that night. But what's wrong with Motzei Shabbat? Right? There's no such issue. Why are you not allowed? To which Amar Rabbi Zera, we're going to have two answers. One will be rejected. And from that, we're going to get to the basis of the Zemer on Shabbat that we sing called Ma Yedidu Menuchatech. It's a lot of that Zemer that comes up from the words of our Gemara, which is always nice to see. Amar Rabbi Zera Mishum Cheshbonot, because you're not allowed to do calculations. So we all know you have an event Saturday night. What are you thinking all day? You're obsessed with, right? How many times, I don't know, I wake up Shabbos morning with all these thoughts in my head about upcoming things. And right, you're going to start thinking about the money and what it's going to cost you this wedding and blah, blah, blah. See that the same worries, right, we have now, they had then too. So, what's wrong with that? So you're allowed to calculate in your head, you can't start writing it down, but you can do thinking about all sorts of things that have to do with calculations of money needing to be spent on mitzvot. And getting married is a mitzvah, so there's really nothing wrong with it. Didn't Rav Chisda Rav Hamnuna say, you can do calculations if it's for the purposes of a mitzvah. Okay, that we're going to go from the personal to others to the community. The next thing, the quote Rabbi Elazar is saying, you can say, I'm going to give this amount of money to poor people on Shabbat. This is big debate always. Can you do an appeal on Shabbat in shul? to raise money. Because on the one hand, you have everybody there. On the other hand, it's Shabbat. It seems inappropriate. Here you see that you can do that kind of thing. ואמר רבי יעקב, אמר רבי יוחנן, הולכים לבתי כנסיות ולבתי מדרשות לפקח על עסקי רבים בשבת. You can go to the shuls and the betei midrash, which were basically places where people congregated. The literal translation of Knesset, Beit Knesset, that we're so used to thinking of as a synagogue, but it's a place lekinusim, for gathering. So that was where the people gathered. You can go there and have a town meeting or something to deal with issues that have to do with the community. Right? This all sounds strange to us. You wouldn't think to do these things on Shabbat, and yet they're permitted. ואמר רבי יעקב בר אידי אמר רבי יוחנן, מפקחים פיקוח נפש בשבת. Okay, what does mifakchim mean here? It's a little bit of a strange use of the word. I mean, pikuach nefesh, of course, you can do on Shabbat. What's he telling us? So Rashi says mifakchim means, says motzim laor. We publicize. We publicize the rules of pikuach nefesh on Shabbat. That makes a lot of sense because you want people to know about what's permitted, what's not permitted. Ve'amar Rav Shmuel bar Nachmani amar Rabbi Yonatan. This is a fascinating one. You can really, it gives you a bit of an in into their life and what it was like then. Hochim letartiaot ulekarkiaot. Okay, that's tartiaot, the theaters, and the karkiaot or the kirkasim, the circuses, the places where the Gentiles would gather. You're allowed to go there to a show that's going on. Lefakech al iskei rabim b'Shabbat. Right? Let's say you have an issue and the big wigs are sitting at some theater, right? You always see this, right? That's where all the business is done. You know, they would go and they would schmooze and do business. You can go there and work out things that, you know, you have some issue for the Jewish people that you need to deal with. You can even go to one of these shows or places where they're gathering. You can go there on Shabbat and deal with it. Ve, Tana de Menashe, this will be familiar if you know the Zemer Mayedidut. Mishadchim al hatinoket, right? This is always the one people scream out, right? You're allowed to make shiduchim, which is really a legal arrangement, right? Especially if we've been talking, you're going to see some things in very legalistic terms today, right? You're allowed to arrange marriages, even though it's really an agreement, a legal agreement almost. Le'ares b'Shabbat. You can determine that I'm going to betroth my son to your daughter, etc. This is also in there. Now, this doesn't mean that you can teach a child a book and teach him a trade. What this means is you can, just like l'shadech shiduchim, you can l'shadech a teacher. You can go find a teacher. You meet someone and see, oh, this person looks like they're going to be good. I'm going to hire you on Shabbat. Okay, I'm speaking to you now and I'm saying, oh, wow, I want you to teach my child. Can you tutor him in whatever it might be? Notice it says, right? Lelamdo sefer, you can teach a child for learning, or also umanut, to teach them a trade. You can hire someone to teach your child a trade, because we'll see in Kiddushin, right, how important it is to teach. It's one of the mitzvot, ha'aval haben, to teach them a trade, because it helps them to survive in life. So all these things can be done on Shabbat. So therefore, can't possibly be that the reason is that we're concerned that you're going to start doing all these calculations in your head on Shabbat, and that's forbidden. Ela Amar Rabbi Zera. So what's the reason then? Why can't you do it on Motzei Shabbat? This is a more interesting one. You would imagine. It's hard to imagine someone would do this. Gzera shema yishchot ben of. You might accidentally slaughter a young bird. Okay. Why a young bird? Why not an animal? Why not what you're going to forget it Shabbat? So first of all, yeah, you might get so distracted. Okay, how many of us know when you're having a big event that night, you're distracted and you're not thinking of anything else other than the event. And you might just forget it Shabbat and start getting ready. Okay, first of all, this just came up at the table on Shabbat. Some kids were saying they were working in some hotel in catering, and they had a lot of issues with the mashgiach, and he wasn't very careful. And people would come with their cars, bringing equipment and other things on Shabbat for events on Saturday night, right? That's clearly an issue. And unfortunately, it happens a lot. And because, you have a big event, you have no choice but to, you do have a choice, push the event, I'll make it later. But Saturday night events are filled with problems like that. So there's a problem. You might accidentally slaughter a ben off. Now, why a ben off? So first of all, it's very easy to slaughter a very small bird. So maybe because of that, someone might think, oh, it's just sort of slaughtering a small bird. It's not really work. I can do it, as opposed to, let's say, slaughtering a big animal, which is obviously a lot more work involved. Some people say that there was actually a custom to have young birds at weddings. And that's why they specifically talked about these young birds. It was a custom because it's like a sign of reproducing young birds and that it was this custom. And that's why specifically young birds are mentioned. So the concern is that you'll be mechalel Shabbat, basically. Forget about, just thinking about cheshbonot. That's okay, but you're going to actually slaughter. That's obviously forbidden. Right. It's right. As you're pointing out, the Yom HaZikaron, they always push off, right? They change the dates of Yom HaZikaron, Yom Ha'atzmaut, all sorts of things, so that you don't have Chilul Shabbat associated with it. So now there are events that happen on Shabbat, but you really have to be careful about it. Make sure that the people you're hiring are very aware that nothing is to start before Shabbat ends. So now, Amar le'Abaye, Elame'ata, wait a minute. If we're worried that when there's pressure of getting a lot of food on the table, we're going to make sure that something doesn't come out, right? Don't have a wedding Saturday night so that you don't have Chilul Shabbat. Well, why then don't we change the date of Yom Kippur? We know, learned this many times, that they would change the dates of holidays, right? When they set the calendar, they would make sure, even when they would have witnesses come, they would always make sure that, let's say, Yom Kippur doesn't come out on Sunday or Friday. So you don't have 2 days in a row. So now comes the Gemara and says, well, if you're worried about the food preparation, why don't we say, maybe Yom Kippur that comes out on Monday should be pushed off to Tuesday. There's a big mitzvah to eat on Erev Yom Kippur, which means you're already going to want to eat Saturday night, or possibly you're just worried about not having enough food before the fast on Sunday. And because of that, you might end up starting to prepare your food on Shabbat. So why don't we push it off to Tuesday instead of having it on Monday, which would mean it would start Sunday night, which would mean you don't have a lot of time. To which the Gemara is going to make two distinctions. Okay, so again, they say, why aren't we worried that maybe you'll start slaughtering animals on Shabbos? So number one, hatam de lenafshe lo tavid, hacha de l'acherim tavid. Again, we're getting into psychology of the human behavior. Okay, what do we expect? If you're doing things just for yourself, we're not really worried you're going to be mechalel Shabbat. That doesn't stress you out as much. If I have to put food on the table for my family, yes, it stresses me out to make sure I have food, make sure I have dinner on the table. That's not going to stress me out as much as if I have a big event and I have all these people that I'm supposed to feed and they're going to come. I'm going to be much more stressed. We all know that. And therefore, in that situation, I'll be worried. If it's just feeding my family before Yom Kippur, I'm not that stressed about that. I'm going to forget that it's Shabbat and accidentally slaughter an animal or a bird. But that's one answer. Second answer, inami, alternative answer, hatam ile ravcha, hacha lele ravcha. This is probably what you had thought. I would imagine you probably came up with this one on your own, which is there's a lot of time still. It's not having something Motzei Shabbat is not the same thing as having to eat Sunday afternoon before the fast. You still have the nighttime, you have the morning, there's plenty of time to do things. It's not as stressed as right after Shabbat. Hashta da'ati lahachi. Now that we've gotten to this point, in other words, since we've already given this answer, and the concern is, let's just go back to the beginning. We had not on Friday night because of the bilat mitzvah, and you're going to do a chabura. You're going to injure, the man's going to injure her and cause her to bleed. Then we have Motzei Shabbat because you might end up slaughtering animals. We tried to say, because you might be busy, calculations in your head. No, that we're not worried about, but we are worried about maybe you'll actually slaughter an animal. To which the Gemara says, well, now that you came up with this answer of slaughtering, Erev Shabbat nami, maybe you shouldn't do a wedding on Erev Shabbat because the wedding might last longer if you have a Friday wedding and it goes into Shabbat. Maybe you'll end up needing more food and you'll slaughter young birds. So Friday is also an issue for this same reason. Okay, I have a wedding this Friday, apropos. So right now, what do we do? How do we have Friday weddings? We have Friday weddings. Notice weddings are never on Motzei Shabbat, by the way. Right? I don't think I've ever been to a wedding on Motzei Shabbat. Weddings, I mean, maybe you've been, I don't know, but generally the Rabbanit does not allow weddings. I assume not on Saturday night. I didn't check into it, but I assume. And they don't allow weddings on Friday. Okay, in Israel, this is all controlled by the Rabbanit. Only in the morning. You have to start the wedding in the morning. If you start in the morning, it's okay. But in the afternoon, you can't start your wedding because they're worried you might end up going into Shabbat and you'll end up doing things on Shabbat. Okay, next. Ibayelu. Now they ask the following question. Betulani se b'revi'i v'niv'ele b'revi'i v'lo chashina li karu regata do we say that a betula, let's go back, betula is married on Wednesday. Can her and her husband have relations on Wednesday? On Wednesday, meaning halachic day Wednesday, which ends at sunset, meaning during the day. Okay, there's a sugya that talks about that you shouldn't have sexual relations during the day. Putting that aside, clearly this sugya didn't know of that or wasn't on that issue. Could they have relations during the day? We'll see in a minute what could be the possible reason not to, right? And we're not worried that if they do it during the day, we're leaving too many hours between the time the courts open in the morning. Do we want to leave the least amount of time? And this, if you remember, Rashi quoted it on the Mishnah, which is why exactly the day before the courts? Because we want to have the least possible time, because we don't want him to all of a sudden say, it's not a big deal, I'll just move on. Because we want him to go to court, because we want him to testify that she wasn't a virgin. We want to make sure that nobody comes forward and testifies that she was with someone during the time of the engagement, which would be a problem because engagement is already betrothal, she's designated to this one man, which means she can't be with anyone else, which means if she was, she'd have to get divorced from him. So we're worried that he might not be angry and worked up in the morning already and he'll forget about it and just let it go. And that's pretty serious if really, in fact, she had relations with someone while they were engaged. So are we worried that he'll already he'll have calmed down and he won't go in the morning if they have relations in the afternoon? Or Dilma, according to the first option, we're not worried about that. In other words, according to the first option, we can allow relations during the day. We're not worried those extra few hours are going to cause him to already, forget about it all. Or Dilma, or do we say no? The couple has to have relations at night only. Chamishi means the night of Thursday, which is really Wednesday night, halachically, okay? So do we mean the Be'ilah has to be at night so that there's the least possible amount of time between the time they have relations and the time he could potentially take her to court? So let's figure this out. Tashma, let's learn it to Tane Bar Kapara. Now we finally get to Bar Kapara, which I made mention of in the beginning. His opinion is found in the Yerushalmi, which is why is Betulani say the Yom Revi'i? He has a different answer, and it finally answers our question about the Almanah. Why the Almanah on Thursday? He says the following: Betulani seit beRevi'i ve'niv'elet b'chamishi ho'il v'ne'emra bo bracha ledagim. Almanah niseit b'chamishi v'niv'elet b'shishi ho'il v'ne'emra bo bracha la'adam. Okay, before we get to how this proves the answer, let's just understand it. Then we'll get to the Gemara is going to explain the answer. The reason that a virgin gets married on Wednesday and a widow on Thursday is because we want the wedding to be on Wednesday, and we assume the Be'ilah will be at nighttime, which is already Thursday. And on Thursday, the fish were blessed with Peru Revu, right? Be fruitful and multiply. And we want that blessing to be on the couple. And why a widow on Thursday? Because we want the blessing of we want them to have relations on Thursday night, which is Friday. On Friday in creation, what happened? Humans were created and they were told, be fruitful and multiply. So we want the blessing that was given to them to be on the couple. Okay. So now we have the number one, the distinction and the reason why the Almanah on Thursday. Okay. We'll get to why not, in other words, why not the blessing of the fish on the widow? Okay. We'll talk about that in a minute. But what's the main point they want to get out of here? The issue here is because of the bracha. That's why we want them to have relations at night, but not because we're worried that he'll already calm down and he won't be angry anymore and he won't take her to court. Okay, so because of that, we're not worried. We're not worried about that issue of ikaru data. So now they say what I mentioned before, which is if there's a bracha for the fish and the pruvu is this big bracha that we want them to get, why not let the almana get married on the same day? So they say bracha da adam adifale. We'd rather, okay, if you're going to choose the bracha of the fish or the bracha of humans, we'd rather have the bracha of humans. Now, obviously, why can't the virgin have the bracha of the humans? Because it's on Friday and we don't want to have too much time pass until Monday when the courts open. So they get the bracha of the fish. Obviously, this is not instead of entirely the issue of the courts. This is in addition to it. Okay, we also have the issue of the courts combined with the bracha l'dagim. Okay, and that's why that explains at least why the almanot who don't have that issue, the ideal time to do it is Thursday night when humans were created. Okay, and became blessed with you should be fruitful and multiply. So that's the first thing. Then they say v'inami, second answer, mishum shakdu. Now, what was shakdu? That the rabbis were assiduous with the women. They wanted the men to make a big celebration for 3 days, and that's why the Betulot got married on Wednesday. But now shakdu is going to be used to explain something else having to do with 3 days and something else having to do with the rabbis being assiduous with the women, but not before the wedding, but after the wedding, and also associated with 3 days, but for the almanah, not for the widow, not for the virgin. So let's read what this is. Titania, as it says in a Braita, מפני מה אמרו אלמנה נישאת בחמישי ונבלת בשישי, שאם אתה אומר תיבעל בחמישי, למחר משכים לאומנותו והולך לו. This is what we call, okay, I know in America, I'm sure in other countries as well, right? A long holiday weekend, right? When they push off July 4th to make sure that, it's on a day that you could get Monday, right? It's on a Monday so that you can have a long holiday weekend. They want the couple to have a long holiday weekend. That's why they do it on Thursday. If they were to do it on Wednesday, what would happen? So maybe Thursday he would stay home with her, but Friday he'd go back to work. If you do it on Thursday, Friday he'll stay home with her anyway because they just got married. Then you're going to have Shabbos, and then you end up with Thursday, Friday, Shabbat. He's off from work and he's with her to make her happy. This, by the way, shows, okay, if you heard Ayala Lipson's intro, right? She talked about how there's the legalistic aspects of marriage, and they also talk about the relationship aspects. And this is clearly honing in on the relationship between them. So where we want him, the rabbis took used their power to be able to kind of try to figure out a way that they would ensure that the men stayed home from work and hung out with their wives, even the widows, right? Here you see, instead of 7 days of celebration, there were 3. Okay, this also, by the way, in Avelut, there's also something to the first 3 days. There's the same comparisons. So again, Chamishi b'Shabbat, right? Thursday, Erev Shabbat, and Shabbat. So my ikab in bracha l'shaktu. So we have these, right? Either it's because of bracha, or the bracha of the Adam, or it's because of shaktu. What would be the difference, the nafkamina, as we say, the difference, the practical difference between them? Well, ikabenayu Adam batel, if you have a guy who never works, so there's no worries about him taking the day off, he doesn't work ever. So you wouldn't have to worry about setting the date on a particular date if it was just because of that. Inami Yom Tov shechali op erev Shabbat, or if Yom Tov fell on erev Shabbat, then you could get married the day before, right? You could get married on Wednesday, because on Thursday anyway you'd be home. Friday is Yantif, Shabbos, right? It's anyway a long holiday weekend, so you don't have to worry about making sure it's specifically on Thursday. Now, since we have Bar Kapara, we're going to have 2 other drashot of Bar Kapara. I leave it to you now to think about if there's some connection. I'll try to connect them, but you can think freely on your own. This is already an area where it's very unclear what's going on here. They're bringing these drashot, it seems, because Bar Kapara had this drasha about the bracha for the fish and for humans, and therefore that's why these dates are there. And now we bring 2 other seemingly disconnected drashot that Bar Kapara said. Darish Bar Kapara, Gdolim ma'aseh tzadikim yoter mima'aseh shamayim va'aretz. The actions of the righteous are greater than the actions of the creation of the world by God. Okay, first of all, it's already this connection of creation. That's a clear connection here. When it says that the world was created, it describes it in Sefer Yeshayahu, Af yadi yasta eretz v'yamini tipcha shamayim. Okay, my hand created the foundation of the world, and my right hand set up the heavens. What do you see here? The hand of God is used, singular. When it talks about the righteous acts of the tzaddikim, particularly in the fact that they built the Beit HaMikdash, what does it say? We created a place, an abode for you to dwell. Mikdash Hashem konenu yadecha. The temple of God, your hands created. So here you see hands. Okay, so that the righteous use their hands. That's greater than God who used one hand. One Babylonian came along, his name was Rabbi Chia, and he questioned, and he said, what are you talking about? By creation, it also says the hands of God. The Yabeshet Yadav Yatzaru. The Yabeshet, this is in Tehillim, the Yabasha, the dry land, Yadav Yatzaru, his hands created, plural. So which the Gemara answers, Yadokti. it says it without a vav, which can be read as yado. We read it yadav, but really it could be read as yado, which means it's singular form. V'haktiv yatzaru, but it says yatzaru, the verb is a plural verb, to which our Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, yatzru etzba'otav, his fingers created. Okay, that's the plural of created. Kidichtiv ki yareh shamayim ma'aseh etzba'otecha, when the heavens saw your finger, what your fingers created, yareach v'kochavim asher konanta, right, which is the sun and the moon, the moon and the stars that you created. So there you see the fingers of God, but it's still one hand. Meitive, to which the Gemara questions another pasuk. Hashamayim mesaprim kivod el u'maaseh yadav magidei rakia. The heavens tell the glory of God, and the maaseh yadav, which is us, the created ones. Maaseh yadav magidei rakia. The heavens, right? The rakia, and the sky, and the rakia, which is firmament, tells of the maaseh yadav of God, the great actions of God. Again, maaseh yadav, plural. So how can you say it's singular? To which the Gemara answers, hachi kamar. This is what they meant to say. Maaseh yedehem shel tzadikim mi magid harakia umay nihu matal. This takes us back to Masechet Ta'anit. What is it saying here? The actions that the tzadikim do, the firmaments, which is where the rain comes from, are a testimonial to our actions in this world. The yadav is relating to the righteous people, because if we behave properly, the rains will come. And if we don't, they won't. And therefore, that doesn't relate to God at all. So what's this doing here? I see already in the chat, someone already said this, which is that there's a clear connection here of man and woman getting together to have children, which is their way of acting as God. And I think what they're trying to say here is how important it is to do that and to do it properly, right? And to do it as a maaseh shel tzadikim, that it's even greater than creation. It's like God created the world, which is an unbelievable thing, gave us the power to be able to be our own creators within that world that God created, and that our maasim can be even greater than God's, is what it's saying, right? Which we don't really believe we could be greater than God, but it's a way of encouraging humans to be able to, right, to reproduce, to, and whether it's through children or through their own actions, what potential we have in our actions to act in a way like God, right? And we'll see the next one also connects with this, about having the power to pick and choose what we do in life, what we choose. The next thing is going to be what we choose to listen to, okay, which is very important. That we have the power to do it, but we have to act appropriate, right? We have to choose the right path. Okay, so whether it means having children and creating, or creating in other ways besides just having children, it's being creative beings. Darash Bar Kapara, my dichtiv yated tiyeh lecha ala zeinecha. This is going to take this pasuk entirely out of context. This is when you're out at war and you go to the bathroom, you need to cover things properly. Al tikre azeinecha ela al oznecha. You should put a peg in your ear. What does this mean? She'im yishma adam davar she'eno hagun. If you hear something that's not appropriate, turning now to Amabet, yaniach etzba'o ba'oznav. What is this yated and azeinecha? That your fingers, or you should, right, your fingers are like, we're going to see in a minute, are like a peg that can be put into your ear to block off sound. Okay, meaning watch what you hear. Be careful. If you hear something inappropriate, put your fingers in your ears, close them up. Why are fingers, okay, this is again the same idea, where Rabbi Elazar said, why are humans' fingers like pegs? So my timer, they say, what do you mean? What's the reason? So they say, is it because they're separated, right? That each one is separate? Well, we don't need to ask, why is that? We know why you have separate fingers, because each one serves a different function. And of course, in this world, we're going to be talking about in the function of the world, mainly of the temple and other things. We're going to see what was the purpose of each finger. Okay, each finger had a purpose. Ta'amar, zo zeret, zo kmitza, zo ama, zo etzba, zo buda. Okay, let's go through each of them. The zeret is the pinky. What was that used for? The choshen, the breastplate of the Kohen Gadol, was a zeret or kohen, a zeret rochbo. It was one zeret of length and one zeret of width. So it was used to measure the breastplate of the Kohen. Zo kmitza, the ring finger, the fourth finger, was used for the kmitza. Remember the kmitza? It's where you would take the mincha, the Kohen would stick his 3 middle fingers, and really it was held by the kmitza. That's why it's called the kmitza in Hebrew. It comes from the kmitza that they would do in the temple. Zo ama, the ama would be measured from, right, it's this part of your arm, from your elbow to the end of your middle finger, the longest, your forearm, thank you. Zo etzba, the finger, what was the index finger used for? It's used for the blood of the sin offering. Taval etzba'o badam, you put your etzba in the dam, and then you would use it for sprinkling the blood. And zo gudal, and your thumb was used, if you remember, in the mitzvot, right? They would put the blood on the thumb of the mitzvot. So these fingers are already, we know why they're separated. We don't need to ask, why are they separated like pegs, each one separate? No, because we already know why they're each separate, because they each have their own purpose in the world of the temple. The question is, why are they somewhat cone-shaped, okay, where they get narrower at the top? Why is that? Right, like a peg, right? You put a peg into something, it's narrow at the bottom so it can go in, right? It's more pointy, and then it stays in. So now we're going to get back to our topic. So if you hear something you shouldn't be listening to, put your fingers in your ears, and then they fit in because, okay, I don't know if you've ever tried this, but you can try it at home. Tana de Rabbi Yishmael, another braita about this. Why is the ear, like this, the top part of your ear is hard, but the bottom part, the earlobe, is soft? What's the reason? You can take the bottom part and stick it inside your ear. I don't know if you've ever tried that before either, but you can put it in your ear so that you can close your ear. Tanu Rabbanan, last statement along these lines. Another braita. Al yashmiya adam la'oznav devrim b'telim. Don't listen to frivolous things. This is a very interesting line. They're very easy to burn. Your ears can burn much quicker. Like they'll burn first. But I think this reason, right? People say my ears are burning. But I think what this means is that the ears is a very important channel for accepting information, right? We hear things all the time. And hearing things, if you hear the wrong things, that could, right, send a signal to your brain, and then your brain operates based on what it hears. And it can cause you to do all sorts of things that are bad. So make sure to listen to the right things and not to the wrong things. This, by the way, interestingly connects to both what we're going to get to soon, which is we're going to have this whole issue of Tanat Betulim, where he's going to say she's not a virgin, and she's going to say I was a virgin, and it's his word versus her word. We don't have any testimony here. You see, what you hear in your ears, you have to know what to accept, what not to accept. And then it connects with the end of the previous Masechet, which we often have this connection between the two, which is we ended with, remember the Pundakit, the innkeeper, and she's giving us testimony. Should we listen to it? Should we not listen to it? Right? And you have to figure out what testimony can you listen to? What can you not? Can you accept one witness? Can you accept a witness who's generally not accepted? How do you know they're telling the truth or not? Question them, right? Try to figure out, are they telling the truth or they're not telling the truth? This is what we've been dealing with for a while. What things, how do you approach things where you only hear? You don't know otherwise. So you have to be discerning about which things you should be listening to and which things you shouldn't be listening to. Okay, next. Now we're going to have a question, and this is where I mentioned in the beginning of the class. So we started with, no matter what, you clearly shouldn't have bilan Erev Shabbat, and they said because you're going to make a chabura, and that's obviously forbidden on Shabbat. This Gemara is going to say not necessarily, and it's got a very interesting approach, you might want to say, and you might be a little bit bothered by the way they're going to be speaking about this, but what we're basically going to talk about, is it considered an injury that's going to be forbidden on Shabbat when the man tears the woman's hymen in intercourse for the first time? So what was clear to the Braita is not clear to the people of the Gemara living later. They must not have seen this Braita according to many of the commentaries. So they now ask, can you have relations on the first night on Shabbat? Do we say that the blood was kind of in the blood is kind of sitting there in her body, like a little pool of blood. And all we're doing is like opening the door and the blood is coming out. That's not the same as if I make a cut, right, on my arm and I cut something that causes blood to come out. This blood was kind of ready to come out. It's just kind of sitting there. And when the hymen tears, that lets the blood out. And then it's not really causing, it's not like an incision or something. And that we're now causing blood that wouldn't have come out otherwise to come out. Or is the blood viewed? It's in the blood vessels. Again, this is not necessarily a question of reality. It's more how we perceive it. It's not like maybe it's a question of reality and they really understand how it works. Or maybe it's a question of how is it perceived? Or do we view it that it was mechubar laguf? In other words, we view this blood as kind of separate from her body, and therefore you're just kind of letting it out. It's like opening a door. And then that's not forbidden. Or do we say, no, it was really as part of her body, connected with her body. And when you tear the hymen, the man tears it at an intercourse, it breaks, and then the blood comes out. So now, that's the question. But within that question, they're going to say, right, the obvious right now is that if it's mifkab pakid, it's just kind of collected and you're letting it out, it's not forbidden on Shabbat. If it's chabur mechaber, connected to your body, and then you're cutting it and it's letting it out, that's obviously forbidden. But now the Gemara is going to have two different versions of the sugya. It's going to remind us all of our sugyas of Masechet Shabbat. For those who learn Masechet Shabbat, you'll remember a lot of these concepts. So we're going to get into davar she'eino mitkaven, when you do a malacha where you weren't intending to do that malacha, but it happened anyway. Like, for example, I'm washing my hands over the grass. I'm not intending to water the grass, but the grass is getting watered, right? So there's a machloket, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Yehuda, whether it's forbidden or not. That case is no matter what forbidden, because we call it psik reisha. It's definitely going to happen. But we're going to put that aside for right now. Just the concept is, I didn't intend to water the grass. I was doing something else. While I did that, something else happened. So Shimon says it's forbidden. Rabbi Yehuda says it's permitted. That's one thing. We're going to get to makalkel. What if it's a destructive act? Maybe even if it is something that would normally forbidden, but if you're destroying something, then it's not a problem. So we're now going to have two different versions of the sugya. One is going to start with, even if you say it's mifkab pakid, which theoretically should say it's permitted, maybe it's forbidden, and we're going to go through a whole line of questioning. Then we're going to have, even if you say it's chabur mechaber, which should be forbidden, maybe theoretically in this case we'll actually permit it. That's going to be the two approaches. So here goes. Intim tzalomer dam mifkab pakid. If you're going to say that the blood was really just collected, lidam hu tzarich ushave. So do you say he was really trying to get the blood out because he wanted to know that she was a virgin, and therefore it's permitted because, again, you don't want the tear, the incision, you just want the blood to get out, and you're basically just opening the door to let the blood out. O dilma lepetach hu tzarich. Maybe, again, this is where I think you're not going to enjoy this discussion, but maybe he wants it to be open there for the next time he goes in, and it'll be more comfortable. So he wants to open up her body to be more accessible, in which case, right, or however you're going to describe this, I don't know exactly, but lepetach hu tzarich, he wants to basically open up her body, right, open up the tear, va'asir, and then it'll be forbidden because that's something else. Forget about chabura, letting blood out. We don't care about that because the dam is mifkab pakid. What's the issue? Now it's a question which malacha this is. Either it's boneh, like you're opening, right, making an entry area into something that would be a tolada anyway. It's not building really, but it would be an outgrowth of that malacha. Or it could be what we call makeh patish, the final blow, because he's basically, first of all, he's consummating the marriage. So it would be like the final blow on creating something, right? If you're making a vessel, the final blow is always forbidden. That's a malacha. So maybe that's what it is, okay? And then it would be forbidden. Now they say, if you say he really just wants to get the blood out, the petach, it's happening anyway, but that's not his intent. Now we get into davar she'eino mitkaven. Well, there's a machlokah between Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda. It's that according to this, it would be a davar she'eino mitkaven. You weren't intending to make a petach, but in the end, you made a petach. So if you're Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Shimon, davar she'eino mitkaven mital. Do we hold like Rabbi Shimon that it's a davar she'eino mitkaven? You weren't intending that, so it's permitted. Oh, halakha Rabbi Yehuda, damar davar she'eino mitkaven asur. Or do we hold like Rabbi Yehuda, who holds the davar she'eino mitkaven is forbidden? The intim tzalomer, but there's another machlokah Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. Intim tzalomer halakha Rabbi Yehuda. If you hold the halachas like Rabbi Yehuda when it comes to davar she'eino mitkaven, and it's forbidden, even so, still you might permit it. Why? Because mekalkel hu etz al petach Are you making, is it you're destroying something? Now, what are you destroying? Well, remember, we kept talking about how a virgin is considered a good thing, right? And she's worth more money. You've now destroyed her because you've torn her betulim. That's destroying. She's no longer a virgin. Or is it mitakenu etzalapeta? Or for next time you go in, it'll be more open, and maybe that's a tikkun. And then the sugya doesn't go on like the next one does. You'll see but some people actually have the version that it does go on and say the next thing is going to say in the next sugya, which is Mikal, even if you say it's Makalkel, there's Machlokah Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon, whether Makalkel is, actually Rabbi Yehuda there is lenient and says Makalkel is exempt, and Rabbi Shimon there is strict and says Makalkel is Chayat. So then we're still going to have a question even with the Makalkel. Okay, next. The second version is to say, Ika da Amre, some people say that the starting point was not that you would think it would be permitted because Mifkad Paki, but the starting, and then maybe even though you'd think it would be permitted, it might still be forbidden, because maybe it's got, right, maybe it's Tavar with Kavin, maybe we hold like Rabbi Yehuda. Maybe it's, right, maybe it's Tikkun, maybe it's Makalka, we don't know, right? Depends how you look at it. Now we say, Ika da Amre, some people say they started off saying, Imtim Tzalom Adam Chibur Mechaber. Really, the dam is part of the body, in which case, when you tear the hymen, you're ruining it. And then, Lidamu Tzarich Vasul, but even within that, maybe you'll permit it. Why? Because you need the blood, and therefore it's forbidden. In other words, he wants the blood to come out. So that would clearly be forbidden. Odilma lahan atatzmo tzarich. Maybe he's just doing it for the sake of enjoyment. I think someone just wrote this in the chat. Maybe he's doing it for the sake of enjoyment, in which case it would be permitted. He's not doing it to tear her hymen. He's doing it for this, right? Maybe he is, because maybe he wants to see the blood and make sure she was a virgin and he wants to check. Then he needs the blood. Or maybe he's just doing it for the sake of enjoyment. And then it would be permitted because, again, well, then it would be why permitted? Because it's a davar she'eino with kavin, but then you'd have to say Rabbi Shimon. So the blood just comes out. He wasn't intended for it to come out. Then again, you'd have to ask, halakha Rabbi Yehuda, who forbids davar she'eino with kavin, or halakha Rabbi Shimon, who permits it. And even if you say, we hold like Rabbi Yehuda that it's davar she'eino with kavin, and which is forbidden, mikalkel b'chabura or mitaken b'chaburahu. Or is he fixing something because, right? Or is he destroying something because he's destroying her virginity, which is looked at as a destructive act? Or is it mitaken b'chaburahu? Or is he fixing something because he's creating an opening in her body? The imtim tzalomer, this is where I said that last week it didn't continue, but some people think it did continue to say this. The imtim tzalomer makalka b'chaburahu, if it is kilkul, well, there's still a machloket about that between Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda. The makalkal halacha ka Rabbi Yehuda or halacha ka Rabbi Shimon. Do we hold like Rabbi Yehuda the makalkal is permitted? In which case, even though we started with chibur and mechaber, and even though we said halacha ka Rabbi Yehuda that it's davar she'eino with kavin and forbidden, still we could view this as makalkal and it would be permitted. Or do we hold like Rabbi Shimon? Then we'd have to hold like Rabbi Yehuda by davar she'eino with kavin, by Rabbi Shimon by makalkal, and then we get to the conclusion that it's forbidden. So we're left with a big question and a question within a question, and two questions within this big question. And with that, maybe I've confused you a little bit, but you now have a big question as to, we've seen at least all the possibilities of what this could possibly be. We don't yet have an answer. We'll see, maybe tomorrow we'll get to an answer. Have a great day, everybody.